Oh, hello. You know, it's hard to tell if what you if you do something. I don't want to put parameters on what you do, who you date, what job you have, how you spoke to someone. I mean, it could be what fruit you picked at the supermarket. Whatever you do, you know, it's hard to tell when you do it, and it's really impossible to tell if it's a failure or a success. And you know, for the most part, you just have to do what comes natural to you, what you feel is right. And whatever the result, it will be right. It'll be a success. And now the world might look in on it and say it was a failure, you know. And I say that there are no losers in the world. There are only learners. You know, if someone loses at a game or loses in some way in life, they learn. They learn how to not do that again. Well, they learn that what they wanted isn't really what they wanted. And sometimes, like you have to date a person to find out they're not your cup of tea, and that's not a mistake. It's not a failure. That's learning, you know. And of course, with a dating situation, if you get a package, a baby, it can be a hard lesson to learn. And a lot of women and men go through that. So, you know, I told a man that I knew at AA. He was dating a woman who was an AA member, and she was an only child, and she was a hot mess. She was a psychopath, probably a narcissist, I would assume. But I told her, watch out, and he didn't listen, of course. And he had a child with her. He actually got married. Now they're divorced, and she lives somewhere else, and he has the kid. She's a horrible mother. She's very selfish because she's an only child, and that's what only children are, for the most part. They're very selfish people. Um, because they're not grown up when they were children, they didn't have to give up anything because of their brother or sister that they didn't have. And the mother and father always made them number one because they were number one and they were the only one. So it creates a dynamic that's very difficult to carry on into adulthood. And that's why she was an alcoholic and she was a drug addict and she abandoned her kid. But I saw all that and I told them, I was like, stay away from her, and the Allura took him in, you know. And now you would say that's a failure on his part. But he has a beautiful kid, little Joe. And little Joe's a great kid. But you know what the problem is with little Joe now is little Joe is an only child. And I told him about that too. But it's very hard to have another child with another woman when you already have a child, you know. But and there's a time limit, because I'd say it's roughly around 7 years. If the child reaches 7 years old, um, and doesn't have a brother or sister before that, uh, there it doesn't matter after that if you have a child or not, because that 7-year old is going to think of himself as an only child, and he's going to act and function as if he's an only child. So it, you have a window of opportunity, and he's getting close to the end if he hasn't gotten there. Uh, so and it's really bad. People weren't meant to have one child. Everybody was meant to have a brother or sister or both. And maybe you hate your brother or sister, but they made you a better person, whether you like it or not. They made you see the world in a different way because of your brother and sister. And And there's nobody, a friend, a stepbrother or stepsister, can't do that. They cannot do that. You know, even a half brother or half sister has a problem doing that. The real brother and sister really, it's a bond. It's like twins. You know, twins have a bond, and nobody else can come into that bond and tell them what to do or tell them how to think because they are what they are and they know it. You know, they feel certain things that we don't. You know, and who are we to say it's not right? And you know, there was a pair of twins. Um, they were old. They didn't know they were twins. They didn't know they had a twin, and they found themselves through DNA. And they were men, and they lived one in I think on the East Coast, one on the West Coast, and it was just so funny because you know their dog had the same name, they had the same job, they lived in the same kind of house, they married the same kind of woman. The woman even had the same name, you know. So it was just the the contrast was amazing, and they had never met each other. And when they got together, they were like, "Wow, that's really amazing." So there's more to life than what you think, you know. And there's questions that we don't have answers to. And you know, the Nazis during the concentration camps, they separated twins. They studied twins because they knew there was something there, and they wanted to know more. They had questions they didn't have answers to, and using the opportunity of the concentration camps, they could do things they couldn't do normally, so they did them. But you know, it's just as an only child, you miss all that. You miss all those opportunities. I would say it's better to have a half brother or half sister, or even a step brother or stepsister than nothing. Absolutely nothing. And this girl that I'm talking about, she had nothing. You know, she was just herself. And, you know, it's very difficult. It wasn't her fault. I'm not blaming her. She had no choice in having a brother or sister. That wasn't her choice to make. But it affected her life, you know. It affected her future, and it affected her son's life. And you know, uh, I don't know what else you can do, but uh, yeah, once the damage is done, once the child is grown, there's no going back. And that's what I'm saying. What you consider a failure or a success may not reveal itself for a while. You know, a lot of companies start out as failures. Apple was a failure in the beginning. They fired Steve Jobs. They had a lot of problems. You know, and today you would say it's a great success. One of the richest companies in the world. You know, and so it depends on when you judge it. You know, and you know, I was found guilty of a crime I didn't commit, and down the road, the appellate court saw it my way, and I was relieved of those charges. They were dismissed and appealed on appeal, and I knew I wasn't guilty, and that's why I took it to trial, and I won. Now it cost me a lot to win, and I should never have had to do what I did or go through what I went through. But you know, again, that's not success or failure. I know a lot more about the legal system now than I ever did before. I had two more cases after that case that I tried to take to trial, and the government wouldn't let me take them to trial because they're afraid of me now. And they learned their lesson with me. You know, like, oh, we don't want to take him to trial. he did us, he got us the last time. So And the one thing the courts always hate is to be proven wrong, especially the way I did it. So, it's just the value of, a lot of people bought Smush stock yesterday, and they're going to find out. That was trying to shut me up. They're going to find out they made a big mistake. You know, even if you put 1 million people on Mars, how does that correlate to profit for SpaceX? Is he going to charge these 1 million people to go to Mars? Um, and what would that charge be? And who the hell would pay it? But yeah, besides that, you know, he's going to put data centers in space, and he's going to charge Apple and Microsoft and T-Mobile and stuff to use his data centers. I mean, and what happens when an asteroid or a meteor finds its way to a said data center? Then what? Oh, sorry. I mean, there's just so many ifs and questions that have no answers, and the risk is just tremendously high. So I don't know. Is it a win to buy his stock? I mean, you might think so now. I mean, if you bought it yesterday, you can sell it for more than you bought it yesterday today. And to somebody, that would be a win. But that's not the idea. The idea is to hold on to it or see it grow. Like a Home Depot stock. Home Depot started small and took off like crazy. But Home Depot actually sells stuff, that people need. What does SpaceX sell that we need? It's a lot of hype. It's a lot of bullshit, you know. And, is he going to be in a monopoly on the internet? That he's going to own Starlink and you're not going to be able to get on the internet unless you pay him? Is that the road we're going down? You know, and that's really bad. Uh, is he going to have a monopoly to going to space? You can't go to space unless you go on his rocket. That's really bad. So there's not a lot of good in what's happening with him, and he's the worst person to make a trillionaire because he's an asshole. He might crack a joke here or there, but he's still an asshole. You know, and there's no way to joke around that. You know, he has how many wives and how many kids, and I don't even know if they are his wife, probably just a girlfriend. But he does what he wants. And I guess as a trillionaire, he should be able to, but he doesn't care about people he hurts. And he fired all those Doge people. He didn't care. He fired all those people. They got an email. Go home. And he's just very cold-hearted, very cruel. Grew up in apartheid, South Africa. It's not really surprising. What is surprising is that you're all backing him and trying to boost him up to be something that you in your fantasies, you want him to be a great guy, but that's a fantasy. He's not a great guy. He's never be a great guy. And you know, just because he's got a lot of money now doesn't mean he will in the future. He almost lost Tesla over Doge, and if he lost Tesla over Doge, he would have lost everything. So he's highly leveraged on the banks, and now that he has stockholders with SpaceX, he can't do a lot of things that he could have done 2 days ago. And you know, and for him to buy the company and take it back to private, uh, he can't do that now. It's too late. Maybe he can in the future, but I doubt it. I doubt he would want to. And maybe he wanted to, but I don't think he could. The numbers are just too astronomical. Uh, but I see the stock crashing. I don't see it going anywhere. I think once the hype dies out and once people get past all the hype and all the BS, they're going to say, what do I own? What do I really own? I own a satellite? So what? I, I don't know. Uh, you got Cablevision and uh, Qualcomm, I think, whatever, the big cable company. You know, they don't have what, and they own a lot of satellites. And it's just don't believe the hype.